So good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Flourishing Monday. I have to check it's not a Friday, no, it's definitely Monday morning.
Yeah.
And today we're going to be looking at social value and evidencing need. And I'm joined by Nickala and Nicci, who have decades of experience in this area, which they'll be sharing with you this morning. As ever, there'll be a bit of an opportunity for questions at the end. If you feel you want to ask something as we go through, then please do. We're very open to that. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Nickala. And if you could just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your experience in this area, please.
Sure, will do. So I'm Nickala, as I sort of said earlier, the founding director of Flourish Together. I've worked in the charity, voluntary, social enterprise world for over 20 years. And I would say for the last 10 or 12, I've become a real geek around social value measurement, thanks to this wonderful woman who's probably taught me all I know, to be fair. So I realised quite early on, particularly when I worked with Unlimited years ago, I was one of their kind of award managers or whatever they call them now. Worked with over 2,000 social entrepreneurs during my role there over the years, and they had huge research teams to be able to gather data, and they produced really good research that helped inform all sorts of things, but at a very strategic level and from an organisational point of view. I can't say that we honestly we did give support to people at that time, you know, what is impact measurement, what is social value, but I never really learned fully what it was and what it meant until I went on to develop a number of social ventures. So I had my son and I just thought, oh, I can't be, he's now 15. I thought, I can't be working from Stoke to Scotland on a daily basis, and I can't have a caseload of 70 people I'm working with, and, you know, I'm gonna have to change things around a bit. So over the years, I worked for an organisation called Bubble Enterprises, which is all about enterprise and mental health. I worked for an organisation in Liverpool called Blackburn House and set up a health spa and wellbeing centre there, and several other things. I helped set up a social enterprise cafe, various things, and then I've set up my own, obviously, through Flourish and the pop-up spa work that we do. And all the way along, it was when I think it was when I got out of Unlimited and got into developing social ventures directly, that learning really what impact measurement meant. And yeah, I went on a journey of discovery. Nick has been great at sort of having me shadow her over the years to help you out, really, to be able to manage the influx of work. And it's quite technical, and it's not particularly intuitive, but once you get it and once you know what it is, you know, it's very simple, actually, very straightforward. But everybody's got their own niche things that they need to know or they need to do. So we'll talk a little bit later on perhaps what some of the key areas of impact are, and certainly in workshops this afternoon we'll be looking at that. So hopefully that gives you a flavour of sort of how and where I came into this. And currently, because we're very passionate about this topic, we feed social impact and value measurement into all of our programmes and courses, be it the Time to Grow that we've done, Ellie programmes and various others. We do one-to-one support with people, and I've probably written about 6 or 7 quite in-depth social value reports, notably for Levenshulme Market. Did a big 5-year review for them. Karen from Brain Health Breakthrough, who we've got a little case study of. Beth at Pie, which is a youth education organisation, and several others. Oh, Ready Lane Market Garden. So I've done quite a few across different sectors, and we'll come back to why they're important and why bother, but those are some of the case studies I'll draw on when we talk about that a bit more. There you go.
It's funny holding this key holder. Of course, that's better. Hi, so I'm Nicci. My organisation is called Profit for Purpose. Does what it says on the tin. I work with organisations that aim to put profit back into the community. So a bit of journey of how I got here, probably best to say. Bit of an old veteran now, I suppose. I've been at this for 25 years. So I started my life in this world working for an organisation called Women's Well Voluntary Service, WRVS. So I used to look after all the hospital tea bars and cafes, volunteering, everything that went on in a hospital volunteering wise for the whole of the Northwest. And when I first went into the job, when I was quite young, I was 23 as a regional manager, so it was a bit of a, but I grew up in a charity, I grew up in an old people's home, and it was a charity. So I sort of grown up around older people. Majority of our volunteers were in their 80s. And so, yeah, it was very much at first about sort of making what we call projects profitable, so that profit would go back into patient care. That's where I first fell in love with profit for purpose. And then I went over, after about 3 or 4 years, I went over to the volunteering side, so recruiting and managing training volunteers. And it just hit me. And I wasn't brought up really usually around volunteering. It was Margaret Thatcher era, so there was no sign of that. You went out and got a job. So I was just fascinated by these women, majority of women, men as well, and they'd sort of like been 40 years volunteering. So I would present them with a medal for volunteering, and so I'd go to their homes and I'd have a chat with them, and I was just like, what they do is just amazing. How can you capture them? So I then went on to work for the League of Friends, the opposition, as a community development manager. So actually setting up community friends, health and social care organisations, and saw the same again. And it was like the nature of these people is what makes this happen. Then went on to work with Department of Health, worked on setting up the social enterprise programme within the NHS, and then went on to be an advisor for them and manage spin-outs from the NHS, and still do that today. So people who basically have a project within the NHS or passionate about something, I help them bring it out to social enterprise. So yeah, so that was sort of seeing all of that on a ground level. So I went back to university, did a master's in social enterprise management, and found social accounting as one of the modules. And it was in the very early stages, and it was with an organisation which we spoke about before, the Social Audit Network. I was like, oh, okay, so you can account for this. Back then, we talk about 12 years ago, it was very, very unheard of. So you talk to people about it and they just look at you like, what are you on about?
Well, they tell you it's impossible and you can't. How do you measure, happiness?
So me being me thought, right, okay, yes we can. So went on from my master's to do a PhD in accounting for social value. And it's on hold, by the way. Far too much to do in between.
But I haven't got the patience to do a master's, let alone a PhD. So
I know. So I'm now I'm social entrepreneur in residence at Sheffield University 1 day a week, and we're actually working on a social accounting methodology for measuring the value of impact with knowledge exchange. So with students going into businesses, going into social enterprises, going into public sector, and how do we measure that and how do we communicate it? So back to as part of my PhD, I developed my own social accounting methodology, which is what Nickala's trained in. So it's called Accounting for Social Value. Mainly because I've worked on...
It's just very holistic. Yeah. We'll come back to talk about it more, but there's lots of systems out there and they're either too small-minded, they're not linked enough to what people need, or they're not holistic enough to join the dots to give the people who are interested in the value bit their information, or the community their information. So
yeah, when I first started studying it, and I'd worked directly on the two initial methodologies. So I worked with social return on investment, which was about the time I was working with the Department of Health. So I worked on developing that programme. And in fact, we were, my organisation verified all social return on investments reports nationally.
And social return on investment, and we'll come back to it this afternoon, is a very complicated, very detailed way of measuring impact and value. And it's usually unattainable and unaffordable for a lot of community organisations, but there's ways and means of taking elements of that and blending it with other approaches to make it possible. That makes sense.
Yeah. So, and then the other one on the other side was the Social Audit Network, Social Audit Network, Social Accounting and Audit it's called. which is very different on the other side. So we helped develop that program as well. So I could see both. So we've got SROI, which is very much around numbers, figures. It's a financial social return on investment. So it says for every pound you put into this organisation, it's worth £6-7 worth of value back to the community. Whereas the social audit network on the other side is about case studies and stories. And they argued constantly. And I was sort of like, well, hang on a minute, we can do both. So studying social accounting theory as well. So everything in the background of how it should be and what were the concepts behind that. I developed principles for accounting for social value, because there's a lot of holes in the systems that are out there. You know, I'd seen people send reports in that could count. We had one which was a housing association that claimed that for every pound you invested in it, you got £28 worth of value. And the report was actually done on putting double glazing in. So there was there's holes in the systems that are out there.
And often a report that's like that, depending on who it's for and what it's for, it wouldn't give you the depth of interest of what the community benefit and what the community need is. And it wouldn't be written in a way that is relevant for you for cutting and pasting into your funding bids or your marketing or putting on your websites or whatever. So
there was a real danger with this here, especially at the time with Department of Health sort of nominating it as their main process for accounting for social value. And plus the fact is, and so I got into this huge argument around, well, social value is it's not a fixed thing, because that's what started to happen. They were saying, oh right, well, social value is this, it's that, you know, it's the other. Oh, and here's the called financial proxies, and this is what it should be. And then, you know, we now have these things called calculators and databases where you can just go on there and say, okay, well, yeah, I think we make that difference, so we'll just claim that. It's really quite dangerous. So I set in the principles to stop that happening, and then developed, which you'll see today, a lot easier process for the groups I was working with on the ground level. You know, it's like, how can we take this? How can we still make it legitimate and robust so it stands up, but make it easier for the organisation?
Make the language work.
Make the language work, you know. And it is quite simple, to be perfectly honest. When you take away, social accounting has become a huge industry. When I first started it, there were a lot of financial accountants involved, and you know, they thought it was the same thing, and they did it from a policing point of view. You know, I'll come in and I'll audit your organisation. I don't do that. The reason why I work with my clients for social accounting is so that they can communicate the value that they have, so they can get in more money. And that was always my drive to do this, you know, which has been hugely successful in the process. So
you've talked a little bit there about sort of why people should bother with it. I'm looking at Shelley's sort of set of questions.
Well, yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? We've heard how complicated it can be, and we've heard lots of the terminology thrown around which might not be easily understandable to the person on the street. So in a nutshell, what do we mean when we're talking about social value and evidencing need in really simple terms, so that somebody who hasn't come across this before could understand it?
Do you want me to answer that?
Well, whatever I say will only be regurgitating what you've
well, I think you can probably talk about it on more of a
practical level. I mean, ultimately, it's measuring the change, measuring the journey that someone's been on, and measuring the value of the change that's happened. But fire away, you.
Yeah, so I suppose probably going back to the original sort of definition, social value hasn't got a definition. We can't agree on it. That's the biggest problem in there. Effectively, you know, I look at 3 different definitions for social value. I think it's what I prescribe it is the value of an intervention back to society. It's as simple as that.
And whether that's an activity, an event, a programme, or a whole organisation, when you look at this, you can take the fear out of it or the complication out of it by just measuring a bit what you do for starters, or measuring an element of what you do, so it makes it a bit easier and a bit more manageable.
So the dispute that again? Yeah, it's measuring the value of an intervention.
And the intervention can be, like you say, anything you do. What do we mean by value?
Yeah.
Do you mean financial value? Do you
So
mean...
yeah, did you get that right? Yeah. So that's the next thing, is not assuming what value means. So when we say what is of value to society, society does tell you that.
And you have to ask them, calculator and no infographics going to tell you that.
Yeah. And it's based around something called the theory of change.
So basically it's measuring what the outcome is of your project.
Yeah.
Basically,
it's measuring the difference that you've made to the people or
that's right.
communities that you've been working.
Yeah.
But it's up to the community to say, yes, this is a value to me.
So it starts with, so if you picture, so it all hangs around something called the theory of change, which you'll come across quite a lot. Putting that into English terms, in theory, what has changed? So people will talk about theory of change, and you'll be like, for what it means in theory, what has changed. And there's two elements of that. So notice the in theory, yeah. And I'm used about this because I always go, yeah, well, in reality, it's not about reality, it's in theory what has changed. Yeah. And there's a reason for that, and that's a process of accounting that makes it easier for you. All right. So it goes across a journey, and so
we can run a little workshop on the detail of that a bit later.
You decide when the journey starts and when it finishes. So, and it can be done for your whole organisation. It can be done for one activity. It can be done for a day like today, So you're measuring the change from when people first engage with you to when a certain time where you can measure that change. And that is all it is. 3 simple questions which will make it quite easy for you. To put that more into your head. So we ask, there were other questions, but around the heart of these questions. So first question you would be asking is, what do you value about X? So you ask them straight away, what do you value about this organisation?
And we've got handouts and all of this as part of what we're doing a bit later, but feel free to make your notes.
Your second question would be, what are you doing differently as a result of this? Yeah. And then the third question is, what has changed when you're doing these things differently? So it's very, very simple. There are a lot of other things that go into it, in terms of calculations, which we'll go through, but that is basically
to get started.
What it is.
What's changed for you?
What has changed? What has changed as a result of doing things differently?
So what you're doing is you're scratching away the layers. So initially, what's been a benefit for you from being part of Flourish Together, or being part of stuff, or how have you benefited from being part of Max Tracks? And then what are you now doing differently? What's changed for you? And then beyond that, is there anything you're now doing that you perhaps wouldn't have been doing before as a result of this? So you're really trying to see what's the added bonus, benefit, value, what's the difference, so that, and you learn so much about what you thought the impact you were making was, and what else, because there's usually a lot more to what you do. It's impacting people in many, many ways than you might anticipate, be that to do with their health and well-being, education and skills, improving the environment, benefiting young people, making people feel more safe, all sorts of stuff.
Does it take into account that everybody's unique and at the different timescales?
Yeah. Most definitely.
Yes. We're going to be a safe space to heal and create in nature, but maybe somebody to actually address their problems and deep trauma would actually get worse before you got that.
This is why, the other thing of why I did this too, because these frameworks, there's 120,000 social impact measurement frameworks out there. Everything from the happiness effect through to environmental, through to the housing one, yeah. So
Tom's,
which totally goes against everything that I always talk about. Again, they're these predetermined measures that, you know, as far as social accounting theory goes, that just makes it not accountable just by assuming. So you develop a measurement framework. So, I mean, we'll go through this later, but you look at your stakeholders and they won't all have the same measurement processes, or it might
They won't
be a
all
different...
value the same things.
Yeah.
But the beauty of what we'll show you later is you don't just use it as an impact measurement exercise. You use it as a business development tool, reconnecting with your partners tool. It's useful on a number of levels rather than just evaluation.
I guess what I'm saying is
Yeah.
that certain people who are quite well, and then we'll give them support, are going to flourish.
Oh, yeah.
together, whereas
Yes.
if I was taking on harder cases,
Yeah.
that's going to be
So you'd want to do
longer, isn't it?
Absolutely.
an initial,
Longitudinal
Yeah.
study.
an initial theory of change from the intervention, but then you would want to put in further measurement over a period of time. The other thing to think about as well, we'll go through more of this, is what we call the ripple effect. So the other thing that a lot of the methodologies out there don't do is follow the ripple effect, which is what I wanted to put into the accounting for social value. So you may have a change from what you've learned, but that also has an effect on the people around you. You know, so it doesn't just stop with you. There's a ripple effect from it too. So it's about developing your own what we call measurement framework, which enables that to look at the different journeys, to look at the sort of the ripple effect, and you do it over a year, over a managed process.
And you might then repeat it. So when we work with people, we perhaps do one, you know, as thorough as we can at that point, wherever people are at with what they're up to, and then usually between 2 and 3 years later, we repeat it again with a lot more knowledge and evidence. And what we try and do is train people in how to do this so they can gather the majority of what they need and are not beholden to consultants. And then a year or 2 or 5 years later, when they're ready to review it all again, they've already been gathering all this stuff in a good way, you know, an organised, fairly organised, easy, simple way, so that they've been, it's all there, all the data that we had to go and work hard to find in the first place and set up ways to do it is all sitting there a few years later with a lot more depth and with a lot more knowledge around different kinds of impact that have happened.
Yeah, because you wouldn't want it to be the case that the people who need the help the most, because they're showing slower progress.
You've got to put in space for relapse as well, I suppose.
Exactly.
You've got to have that you know, people can relapse and will relapse.
I think
with a lot of
sometimes they
things.
need it. They
So,
go with the
so
long
it gets, you need sometimes you need that fresh start. So to get that fresh start, it's not the big ladder, it's the small ladder.
And it's certainly, measuring stuff isn't a test. There's no right or wrong answer to it. It's about just looking at what's going on, and it isn't about what one individual does and doesn't progress to. It's about the quality of the service and the quality of interventions that you're providing, and the depth and the, you know, the effectiveness or the, you know, efficiency. And there's all sorts of things that you'd be measuring over and above what, you know, Annie did with, as a result of coming on your retreat, or what, you know what I mean? It's a lot more that you can look at.
Framework's more kind of generic.
Yeah, it can be quite generic, but specific to you. And so the beauty of some of this is, whilst we'll show you and we'll think about some of those frameworks out there that are useful to learn from and useful to track or useful to bear in mind. If you can come up with your own, what I loved about learning all of this and doing it with various clients now is you give power back to the organisation. At the moment, you're probably all beholden to funders who, they want this report, they want this stat, some commissioner wants this churning out at the end of every month or 6 months, and it becomes relentless. And if you can go in saying, we've got our own impact measurement framework, this is how we do it, this is what we do, you kind of take back control, so to speak, in terms of
You're giving them first before they start.
Yeah, and you can, yeah, because often if you do it well, you'll already be tracking well over and above and in a much more authentic way than they would have wanted in the first place. And anything else you're not, you just tack in. So you'll end up with a consistent approach that suits you, suits your organisation, is what your stakeholders have told you they value. So that's what you track. And then anything as a new stakeholder, your new funder or new client or your new commissioner or whoever might say they want to know this, this and this. 2/3 of it you'll already be capturing, and there might just be one nuanced thing because you're working in a new community or with a new program or on a new subject, and you just add in a few extra bits, but it doesn't take you hugely off track every time you run a program.
It's a bit different for each other, isn't it? I mean,
Exactly.
might feel great, but then the next day you might be stiff and the negative energy is coming out. 4 or 5 days later, you might feel great again.
When I first started working with the social accounting world, you know, I can remember the answer to sort of ask it to talk to so much measure, and I can remember sort of the guy that I worked with the SROI, a guy called Jeremy Nichols, and all the social accounting people from Liverpool. If I get to tell you the history, you would see that, yeah. That's where I worked, and it usually, where was it? Oh yeah, so their response was, it's better to measure something than not measure at all.
Yeah.
That's what they used to say, and I've always kept that in my mind. You know, think about internally, we think, oh my gosh, there's all of this that I need to measure, I need to do this, I need to do that. First of all, it's not mandatory. Okay, you don't have to. It will become that way in the future.
And the only semi-mandatory bit is if you're a kick and then you have to do your, I always get them mixed up, was it kick 34 or kick 36? Basically,
but that's
not this. It can be if you're doing regular impact and value measurement, whatever you find out annually or however often, you can tuck into your online reports that get submitted. But
it's quite interesting that they've got Northern Funding Panel actually learn that they actually go onto your company's house and put your report.
They do.
Some figures in there.
I often tell people, your accountant will say, oh, don't bother, just write a few lines, job done. And what they don't realise is that funders, like you say, will go and check these things. They'll look at your financial accounts, but they'll also look at your kick reports or whatever else they can get their hands on. And Twitter and everything else.
Perfect gradual increase. Whereas life's not like that, is it?
Well, to be quite honest, as funders, so me and Nickala will tell you our frustration with funders and accounting for social value. I spent a long time with the lottery, big lottery as it was, community lottery now, doing reports called beyond the outcomes, because a lot of funders are outcomes based. So this will make more sense as we start to go through sort of the that theory of change model. So it's sort of like the numbers based. So the lottery is probably one that's totally in there. They call themselves an outcomes based funder. You know, so they'd want you to be reporting. So when you set your outcomes, you'd be like, by the end of 2023, we will have engaged with 20 young people that have a lack of confidence, yeah? So it's very much tick box. And because it's set like that, you miss everything else. So I spent a lot of time sort of doing these reports, say, hang on a minute, this has happened as well. So beyond the outcomes. Funders are getting there in terms of social value. They don't quite understand it. And this, unfortunately, is a lot of the problem with accounting for social value and talking about social value. A lot of places, and this is around the history of it, so we have the Public Services Social Value Act that came into place in 2012 as a result of the work I was doing with the Department of Health. Yeah, it's the Public Services. And then in brackets, Social Value Act 2012.
Which means that now in certain public sector departments, councils, health and other areas, they've got certain conditions written into their commissioning principles or contracting rules to say that they should try and commission more with purpose-led, social value-led organisations.
So when the purpose of that and the reason why it came in was that the government launched a white paper called Open Public Services, which basically meant, you know, why should we assume that we can deliver public services? Let's contract it out. That's what the white paper was. So there was this mass panic. And there was this mass panic by people saying, well, if you're going to do that, that will mean that there are loads of private companies making money out of our public services. So in came Chris White, the MP, and he put in a private members bill. Originally, it was quite tight. So originally it was, okay, you can only commission to social enterprises. So you can only contract in social enterprises. Obviously, the government didn't like that and watered it down.
And there's probably not enough social enterprises up running
No,
that
there
can operate at
wasn't.
the level that you would need.
I mean, that's
fulfill
why
that.
they launched the programme with the NHS with a load of funding to try and encourage social enterprise back then. Whole political thing that went on sort of 2012, 2013. And so, yeah, so it was watered down and it came out with this provision that basically said any local authority, any government organisation wanting to contract the delivery of public services has to consider social value. So, there goes the debate again about what is social value. So that went on for about 4 years. Then you saw local authorities then bringing in and adopting social value charters. So I work with quite a lot of local authorities in doing that. So they sort of, right, okay, well, this is the way we can do it. We can set the social value charter up. But then, frustratingly, they went, okay, well, this is what we expect from you. We expect you to report back on these things. And this is what social value is.
I was going to say, is this about social value for statutory and council organisations, or is it for the end user? Because do we need to fit into that box?
This is one of the considerations that you need to look at. But if you do it the way that we show you, you'll do it anyway.
I know that we personally had we have a small commission from SMBC, and that's been in place for as long as I know, for about 16 years. Yeah. Then they decided that they was going to put a contract onto that.
Yeah, so you had an
a small amount of money. I mean, it's under lottery funding money of their small bit. And through that, they put in all these things that we have to do, and we have 23 of them taken out because we refused to do them.
So you would have had
our social value.
That's
it
it,
turned out that they actually were paying us 11p per person.
Yes.
As an organisation, and then we was feeding back the outcomes and the financial difference between that. So you give us 8,000 a year, we give you over 200,000 pounds worth of free time and work. And the response.
Not quite the balance we were hoping.
So it wasn't the balance, but the response we got was, we don't need to look at that now because it's probably illegal if we was paying that amount.
Right, so yeah,
probably correct.
So that's the world we were in at that time. At that time, well, this is how I can share that with you. It drives me insane. So at that point, we were in service level agreements with commission contracts with government agencies, which were outcomes based. They were tick boxes, yeah. And so they brought out the social value charters, and what they did is they just moved that to tick boxes. Which is real, and that's how it is now. I did training at the Treasury Office for commissioners, and this will just. So I did training on what social value is, you know, how you account for it, exactly as I'm talking to you now, and they just look really puzzled. And these were people like Sodexo, who has Serco, you know, all the big guys. They get the big contracts and then say, right, well, we're going to build a social value supply chain and bring in social enterprises. We're going to pay them next to nothing. Yeah. So, and so I was trying to explain to them that social value comes from the ground up, you know, and they looked at me and they looked puzzled and they're like, why would we want to do that when all we want is the organisation to deliver what we pay them for? That's your issue in what we call social value commissioning. Didn't help that Social Value UK came out and defined social value as the added value of the contract. So there's a national confusion around what social value means,
Well,
which really people like us are constantly.
We do battle against, but I guess looking back at sort of Shelley's questions here, is that kind of why should people bother with it?
Absolutely. We've heard a little bit about the difficulties and we've heard a bit about some of the benefits in terms of having a framework that potentially you can take a bit more control over and give to funders for a bit more consistency, making sure it's the value that your community values. So yeah, what are the benefits? Why should people bother with this?
And certainly, from my point of view, and we'll hear a little case study from Karen shortly, we perhaps took her into here. She couldn't come from Brain Health Breakthrough today, but she sort of puts a few things in a nutshell. Certainly in terms of strengthening the quality of your funding bids, if you haven't got this stuff in, your competitors certainly will. So in those questions where you're trying to evidence need, what's the difference you make? How are you going to measure your impact? What systems have you got in place? You know, these questions are in standard applications, and being able to answer them well and then being able to give them clear and detailed stats on the difference made and what people say about, you know, the impact you've made on them, their community, their lives, or whatever, however you're looking at it. It helps people win awards, for sure. I know people who, you know, I've just written a number of Northern Power Women Awards, and I've been able to put in statistics and data and about the difference made. We don't just say, oh, and we did all this for these people. It's very, very clear on exactly what we've done. It helps you sleep at night, I would say. You know, you get up in the morning, you're trying doing your best with whatever it is that you're offering up for your community. And I think if you've got a way of knowing, so for example, some of you have been on our Time to Grow programme. Forgive me, I've not got the reports here, but I know with our Time to Grow programme, we work with about 119 women through a sort of social enterprise development journey. And because of the way we tracked and monitored that programme, we know that 83% of people who came in the programme completed the programme. So there's a very high completion rate. They stuck with us. We know that 50% of the women were from Black, Asian and other cultural backgrounds, which is higher than a lot of programmes would be in terms of their engagement. We know that almost 50% disclose some form of mental health challenge, which again would be higher than most programmes and mainstream enterprise support might reach. We know that over 70% of them have gone on to set up a venture. And we know that, you know, we've got statistics on how many of them felt they'd increased their income. There's all sorts of stuff that we've been able to gather that we hope will stand us apart when we're going back to our funders next time to say, look at these incredible outcomes, you know, and you can surprise yourself. You know, I've been totally surprised by what we achieve with that. And it goes back to this money situation. You know, we know that because we work with 45 organisations over the last 2 years, through some intensive development support, we applied for just under £1 million across 45 organisations, and we enabled I think something like 35 of those to secure £765,000. So it shows we've had a good return on being able to help people secure money, but also you know, an additional amount of value that's being brought back into Greater Manchester that perhaps wouldn't otherwise have come without direct support and mentoring to do this stuff and physically writing the things. So stuff like that, it helps show how what you're doing differently. And yeah, to be fair, going back to that money, you know, from I think it was about a £12,000 contract from Manchester City Council to work with all these people. You know, we brought in 765,000. So if that isn't, you know, leverage, I don't know what is. But you know, we do it because, you know, it's important. So that's why, you know, I kind of bother with it. I don't know
anything else.
Sorry, how could I measure? Because my projects are only small.
Yeah, we're going to come into all of that this afternoon, so don't you worry. We're going to help everybody walk through how they go about doing this and get a little bit of a plan in place.
So by the end of today, you'll go away with a very simple process to measure your social value.
And look at who specifically you're going to need to talk to and how, and you'll come up with your own methods that are going to work best for you, for your community, and to give credible
It's just
information.
because I've got like 3 different things going on, in 3 different areas.
Yeah.
Totally different.
That's
Yeah.
right.
It's fine.
But they might all have similar thematic
Yeah,
outcomes,
yeah.
to be fair. And you would just ask them what Nicci said before, what have you valued and benefited about being part of this Evermore project? And they'll tell you. And then, what's the difference that's made to you? And then what are you now doing differently as a result? And it'll all come out, and you'll find comparable differences across the 3 projects, and there'll be some sort of bits that are specific to project, but keeping it simple like that means that you don't have to have anything too different for any one project, but the answers coming back will be, if that makes sense. Are we right to broaden our circle and let Jen in? She's sort of tucked out the way. Any other reasons why people should bother?
Yeah, just like
Shuffle.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't know if this is relevant, but when I did start on Evermore, I wanted to employ Martin Secker from the other.
No.
So I think he's a positive psychology guy,
Mm.
and he has like a framework. He's like 5 core elements.
Yeah, so you can put that into as a measurement
Yeah.
tool. We'll show you how to do that.
I'm sure that later.
So I wanted each project that I did to try and have all these, things.
So that's one of the measurement tools within the framework.
Yeah.
You can use different measurement tools, and we'll go through that as we show you how to do that.
And quite often your community will tell you exactly what your measurement framework needs to look like.
Yeah.
With all the best methods in the world, it's like dead clear once you start doing it.
So the benefits of, it's interesting, isn't it? First of all, I need to tell you that our sector isn't very good at it. We do, we're activists. We do, and then we're very quiet about it. It's notoriously always been the case. We don't want to, it feels a bit awkward shouting about the things that we do.
Or we just haven't got the flipping hours in the day.
We haven't got the hours in the day, or it's just not how we're made, because we're totally the opposite. We're activists. The thing that drove me is that need to be able to communicate that to people.
And communicate it in different ways, because just as a quick aside, some of you may have been on sessions, and we have got webinars and all sorts on communicating this in different ways, be it chunking it into very simple terms through Twitter and Facebook. And, there's the full reports, or there's the kind of written element of doing the analysis and the stats, but you can put those into sexy sound bites or funny little GIFs or whatever else. So there's lots of different ways of communicating this.
The thing, I suppose, just go with that, and then I'll talk about benefits. So as the accounting for social value methodology, which we're showing you today, and which Nickala carries out, on top of that, there's a validation process. So your report needs to be validated. So Nickala can validate it for you. I can validate it.
It gives a robustness and a legitimacy. And
what that means is that I stand by any reports, and if there's any criticism, I'll stand up for you. So I've made sure that it's academically robust against theory, against politically robust, and so that's again what gives you that sort of most because I work nationally, most people know about it, so it gives it that for you. So okay, why would you want to do this? What are the benefits? And this has changed usually over time. I suppose we've all gathered that funding's probably the biggest one. Being able to communicate the value in funding, which is the drive of the most organisations, because that's naturally what we do. Second one is the Public Services Social Value Act. So it's now gone into law this year. That if you go for a public service contract, you now have to prove your social value. So about 30% on weighting on whether you will get that contract is based on being able to report your social value. Okay, that's for any organisation. That's not just social enterprises. So we've got an interesting thing going on with private organisations at the moment that also have to report their social value. Okay, so that's probably, I would say that's probably the top driver within the UK at the moment, more than anything. Then funding is probably the second one. The third one is what we call social investment. So you mentioned crowdfunding. Crowdfunding is about buying your value. You're selling your value. Any social investment, which is basically modern fundraising, but any social investment, people giving you money based on what their value, and don't underestimate that. You know, I always tell a story about the Spider-Man in Stockport. Have you ever come across it? Yeah. Okay, so when crowdfunding first started, we only had one platform, which is crowdfunding. There's loads of them now. And this guy put on a crowdfunding plate to buy a Spider-Man outfit. And it was for children's parties at the time. And I remember looking at it and thinking, nobody's going to give me money for that. He raised enough money to buy about 10 Spider-Man outfits. And so he has got different outfits for different things. And obviously that's now become a big thing. And, you know, never underestimate what people value. You know, and that's why it's so important to be able to communicate the value that you make, because that's what's going to make people give you money. So that's the third one. Fourth one is that's happened, that's even gone even further in COVID, is what we call the social contract. The social contract is not a written thing, it's how society perceives you as an organisation. So it's holding you to account. That's happening usually, you just switch on the TV and people are holding companies to account all over the place. Unfortunately for our sector, it's got worse because we've had a lot of bad press from charities not doing what they're perceived to do. As a social enterprise, your social contract levels here, people expect you to do good. So there's a point of social accounting as a method of what we call stakeholder management. So managing your stakeholder expectations. So that's your fourth one. Last one I'll talk about very briefly is ethical consumerism. That has increased by 200% in the last 2 years. People buying with a purpose, buying with their values. Consumerism. It's consumers buying ethically. People who consume things, and that's not just things like fair trade and I don't know. Let me think of another one. Save the Rainforest, Unicorn in Chiltern. You know, it's not just about buying ethically. It's about buying from organisations that you perceive operate ethically as well. So that's
more choosing to buy with your ethics, so like buy local or buy social, or you know, buy from women in business, or there's like Black Pound Day, you know, where they're trying to get more money into black entrepreneurs.
I guess one thing we've not mentioned about this is generating more services.
Totally, yeah. That's why when I first started working with this, I used to do quite a lot of talks for MMU on marketing as social value-based marketing. And so it's so funny because now you switch the adverts on, I would say 80% of adverts are playing with your value structures. You know, I do a workshop called Value and Values in Today's Business, and it's fascinating how all that works. And of course, onto the fact that that's
infuriating as well, depending on who's spouting what.
Yeah, we're very easy. We easily hold people to account. So, and if you break that social contract, you're not going to operate. That's it.
Sorry, Daniela, what were you going to ask?
Isn't there not quite a lot of psychology in that?
Yes.
And that basically they're using, you know, you said adverts are playing with your values.
So
There's a
it's
lot of
like,
psychology in that.
as I go further into social value and concepts, there's a lot around language and how you word things, how you tell people things. So there is quite a lot. There's quite a lot. Yeah,
It's
it's
doing it.
usually
It's doing it
marketing.
authentically, and there's not, and it's how you're building trust in essence.
Yeah, and that's the difference. You see, it's funny. So we were having a conversation about that before, about motivation. So yeah, this is my stand on my soapbox. The organisations that are out there that are having to do it because we were getting this sort of world of, okay, how can I do that? Here's a list of things that are social value. I'll just make sure I do those. Yeah, compared to organisations like ourselves, that's our whole motivation for it. It's the reason why we do it. We do it to make that difference. You know. Yeah. All we do is struggle with how do we capture that and communicate it. You know, but it's what we do naturally.
Can I? Oh, sorry. I was just going to say there's one other benefit which is related to some of the things we've said, which is when you do this work, when you ask these questions, you will find out more about the impact that you've had on the people you work with, which you didn't know. And that's brilliant because of how it makes you feel as a founder. And Nickala said it helps you sleep at night, but it also keeps you going.
It helps you to design new products and services that you hadn't thought of.
But there's also the sharing that with your team. You've got volunteers that you work with or staff, but for them to know the difference that you're making. So it's I know a few people express that they don't like doing this stuff. It's actually, it can help
Helps grow your
fantastic
purpose.
and you know, and then you suddenly see you want to share this with the team and the benefit of sharing it with the team.
I think that's the difference, just quickly to point on that very quickly. Sorry. I think that's the difference of doing it from the fact that you want to rather than you have to.
Yeah.
So it makes a huge difference because
You make it simple, you make it fun, and you make it actually aid the other elements of your whatever business development, marketing, reaching out to different groups that you're dealing with. It all makes life a bit simpler, doesn't it?
Whenever you're passionate about anything, that definitely comes across, as opposed to like what Nicci was just saying there. You've got to do it to the fact, you know, same kind of thing. You've got to be done.
Oh, trust me, when I'm reeling through spreadsheets at the deadline when these damn reports have got to be in, I'm like, oh, I mean, for Flourish here, you know, we have to report back to people, and it's like, oh, it's that Sunday afternoon job. But go on, Jen, what were you going to say?
I was just thinking it's really nice to like talk about our accomplishments with each other as a way of sharing social value. And I just wanted to share something that happened this morning. Like I got a text message out of the blue from somebody, and I feel so tearful like talking about it. And I got this message on the train. I've not heard from this guy for like 4 years. And just out of the blue, he said, I send my regards to you because you were the reason to change my life for the better. Thank you for what you did for us. And I thought, oh, where's that come from? He said, thanks for everything, Amma. I said, Amma, I've not heard from you in such a long time. Why the news? He said, oh, I had a talk to the dentist and I remember that you were the one who did the best to teach me how to do that. And I was like, that was 4 years ago.
There you go. Well, this is what we mean by the ripple effect. It can take 3 to 4 years for it to come to the surface.
Yeah, but compare that to like stakeholders responsible about those responsible, they just want constant.
that's why I continue to fight.
I can't say for less people working hard, the numbers probably amazing.
So
No end out, no more forced end out. People need that support in some circumstances for as long as they need that support. It's not about imposing time frames on people. Saying it will be well within 12 weeks or 16 weeks. It's not about that, it's about holistically, person-centered. That person is the only important person in that way.
You know, if the darkest days before dawn, it might look like somebody's not doing that well.
Oh, yeah.
And even I think that applies to public sector organisations, because I work in conjunction with the NHS in their mental health service, and from day one the manager, like equivalent in their organisation, just said it's a numbers game. About the numbers. And I'm like, no, it's not. You know, I kind of was stuck because it was for them about the numbers, and we were taken on as a charity to get their numbers up.
that's the whole reason why I chose to do it. It's on hold. Well, number one, because I've got loads of other things to do, but it's also because we didn't have the maturity of these processes and to be able to tackle it. But it's that huge argument around, you know, what is social value, you know, and let's.
But you can
try and
educate
stop it
people.
from getting it to just be a tick
You can
box
educate the organisations who do give them what they want. Not even growing.
I was just about to say, I think that's why it's important for people like you to have that input, i.e., you know, the input of looking at the legislation, the acts, because in my little experience, I feel like a lot of people who are in positions of power are of that kind of mindset, and that's why it's really important to have, like you were saying, people who are at the ground level feeding back up, as opposed to people at the top, not in a rude way. You might think they know what they're talking about, you know, and the needs of the people who are actually on the ground
But they've
level
usually never walked
to
at all.
make those changes, because you know those in the positions of power tend to not really have
But
the
well, this is
access
interesting,
to-
because if we got everybody in this room and everybody we're working with right now to be able to be better equipped to find their own stats, you know, they're in a much better position to do that. So
I feel like they are too far removed from the situation.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say.
But that's where we come in. And I was just
Well,
gonna
and
say-
you do if you've got the right data.
I was just going to say it's quite relevant to something Nickala and I are involved in at the moment, and that's working with the GMCA, Greater Manchester Coalition of Authorities, and they're looking, so they have a social value charter, and they're looking to put in a mandatory process into Greater Manchester to import social value. So we've been
So we might as well get used to doing it now, because it's got to be done.
it's going to end up being mandatory, in the end. And so, you know, we've battled that, haven't we? So, you know, we've
Gently.
gently pushed it.
So what is the word people like use that word that you know, fight to make those changes? What then are we basically?
There always
at the
will be,
mercy
rest
of-
assured.
Do you know what I mean?
What will
Like,
happen?
We're not unique.
Just go back to the social, the
What
service
is
level agreements in the boxes.
Right.
You know,
That's what
you
I'm trying
tick
to
these
say.
boxes. Now, you see, the thing is we can't get away from that. And this is what we, so we suggested with the GMCA, you know, both of us working on either side, but slowly, respectfully, basically saying, okay, well, why don't we do it from both sides? So why don't we look at the social value charter, and they've got sort of what is called indicators, you know, the benchmarks, we've got these indicators. Why don't we look at that and then break it down for the social economy and sort of what that means? So we'll do it from that side. And then from the other side, and Nickala goes, well, we've got lots of organisations where we can feed back the social value that they create, so you can see actually what is going on the ground level. And that's what it is. You know, it's influencing.
Forcing them to take certain things seriously, or showing them they might want what they want over here for their own methods, but it's not actually fulfilling a need from the people that they're gathering all this data from. And if we just add in a few extra layers, it'll be better for everybody.
It's as if their structures deliberately make it inaccessible. There's no middleman, like people like use to the ground level people.
And there is a
No,
rationale
no,
for
no.
doing that, to be honest, because I've worked on both sides, so I
I
understand.
don't understand you to say.
No, they have to. So if you think about size, you think about the, so let me try and work Serona, which is in Bath, who we did their measurement framework for. That was health and social care coming together. They had 71 contracts. So if you think on a large level, and that's just a small bit of what's going on out there. So the only way they can work is with numbers and figures. Added to the fact that, and this again is academically, is that we're led by positivists that basically work with statistics, with figures. So, and a lot of public services are academic, so they will go with what is they feel is robust. They hate what I call social sciences. That's the field I worked in, which is human behaviour, because it's not predictable. Statistics, so a bit of a little analogy about this before we go on very quickly. So if you're playing pool, you can actually predict if you do it at a circle angle where the ball will go. Yeah, so that's trusting and reassuring. If you put a line of 5 people in a row and the first person turns around, punches the second person, you have no idea what that person's going to do. Okay? Businesses, public services, more so than businesses, don't like that because it's unpredictable. So you do have to play their game, but also offer them more. We're in the process of teaching them. Yeah. So we have to acknowledge that that's always going to be there, you know, because they have to be able to work with those figures. But actually, we've got a lot more power than that.
One last question. You know, in the long term, do you think that eventually that will change? You just said it'll always
Do I think
It's nudging.
Yeah, if you people like you continue doing the work which you are doing.
Well, it's people like us, to be fair, we'll all be doing
Yeah,
it.
do you think that long term though it will change the structure of that of the
In that term, I would say no.
Right.
That's never going to change. There's a lot more something involved in that it will never change. We can influence it. I think we can have. I mean, this is the reason why we started on this journey. The more people, that's what we do. The more people we can show how to do this, the more we can influence them. You only know what you know. So the more knowledge we can get out there, we will never change that. It's just the nature of the beast, really.
And it's the nature of humans as well. So, you know, my background's in marketing, and with everything, you want to have some stats in there and some stories. You have to appeal to the head and the heart. And some people are more strongly head motivated and some people are more led by their emotions. You need the blend in there to reach a different range of people, the statisticians, the social and behavioural
Which
people
is
and so
why
forth.
we combine what we call calculation methods, but how we communicate. So that's where social return on investment is still really important. You know, because it gives people those figures, you know, but we have to combine it with the stories as well.
Absolutely. Stories and
Yeah.
statistics always.
Just on that point, I wonder, I was going to invite, although she's not really here, we've got a case study. We can talk about other examples of sort of how people can overcome some of the difficulties of this, and what examples we've got of where people have had things, you know, work and get direct results. But Karen, I don't know if you can help us set this up. Okay. A lady called Karen Howarth runs something called Brain Health Breakthrough, and some of you may have met her in different ways. You know, we talk about whether things have led to stuff. She'll say herself in a minute, but you know, Karen, you know, won Woman of the Year in Social Enterprise at the She Inspires Awards, and she definitely included some of the stats and the work that we did through her impact measurement in her application. And you know, the research and the impact data that we've been able to get for her has given her much more leverage on a range of funds that she's secured, little contracts that she's secured up in Blackburn with Darwin, where she's based. So we're just going to play a very short, I think it's fairly short, video of hers to just give you a flavour of a bit more about that why bother and how somebody else has gone about doing this. So we hope it will work. We're just going to test it out.
It's a bit slow.
There she is.
Bear with me while I just adjust the sound.
So I think we're getting questions in that. I mean, all sorts of questions that you're going to have so many. Which is why I structure these days in this way. So obviously, you're going to have opportunities to join the day to really teeth into stuff and ask questions. But is anything just stop you?
I actually want to know your opinion about the hacked model that they use for housing associations.
Yeah.
Is it any good or?
So I work with the hack model. So I work with social value supply chains and housing associations. So the hack model is, again, it's a model. It's not a social value model. We'll explain this later. So you've got outcomes, then impact, and then value. most measurement frameworks only measure impact, not value. So HACT is an impact measurement tool. It measures the impact and it stops there. It doesn't then go on to say the value of that in stakeholders' eyes. So it just says, okay, we've done this and it's made this impact. So it was based off social return on investment when they first did the HACT model. It's relevant. The reason why they've done that is they've picked those, again, we call key value indicators that are relevant to housing. So it's the impact measurement. So instead of the other way around, I was basically asking people what they value, they've actually said, well, we've got a hunch that this is what you will value, so we're only going to ask you about that. Does that make sense? Which for me is it's totally against sort of the theory of social impact.
Would that be where I have them just asking, but would there be a way to combine the two?
Yeah.
So if it's
Well, yeah, so we're going to show you how to build that framework and how to put those things that you have to do into the framework.
So I think we've got Karen waiting in the wings, she says.
Just as helpful. Bear with me.
But you couldn't join us, Karen, so I thought I'd just catch you while I could to just find out a little bit more about what made you start to look at measuring your impact and value more closely. I know we've played a little bit of a role in that, in helping you think some of those things through, but it'd be great to just hear, at what point, a few years ago, what made you decide to start measuring your impact and get in touch with us to say, I need to do this? And then we might find out a little bit more about, what that's led to and how that might have helped. Why bother? We're trying to help people partly understand what is social value and impact, but why do it? And that's what we've been chatting about on the panel. But to hear an example like yourself who's started to implement some of these measures, I guess initially, what got you interested in realising you might want to do this?
Well, I think I realised that if I wanted to apply for funding successfully, I'd applied for some funding and been, not successful, that, I really needed to understand more myself about social impact, and B, I felt I needed to collect some of the impacts that we were having, because I was supporting people all the way through COVID, unpaid carers and people with brain injury mainly, and hitting quite a lot of outcomes, and I felt that it was all being lost.
Yeah,
they weren't being captured. I didn't have a system to document what I was actually doing or the impact I was creating, and I didn't really understand how to do that. So I think that's why I reached out to you, because I realised that you're an expert in that field.
And what was interesting as well, we've worked with lots of people who are trying to measure their impact, and we'll work with anybody who does, but there are some social ventures that are more impact measurable than others. There's always impact to measure, there's always things to say, there's always going beyond the testimonials to give people good data to improve their bids, as you've described, or win awards off this stuff. I know when we've worked with people like Beth Nunn, she won a number of awards not long after doing her impact stuff, because she put that data in. And I remember you've won Woman of the Year in Social Enterprise, didn't you?
We've won that, and we were successful with awards for all. We got supported by CVS as a community, Hyndburn community champion, where we started to deliver along COVID, and so we've been successful.
Having those boxes where it says how do you know having an impact, how do you measure your results in this, it just helps when you've got a method that's over and above what you might normally have done, or you've got that data, I know we've got like good couple of reports down, and we're going to start another one. But what I was going to say is that organisations like yours, organisations that work with the most vulnerable, with people with chronic health conditions or different kinds of health and wellbeing challenges, there's a it sounds crude, but there's a saving to the public purse there over and above making your environment look pretty, or having tea and cake, or not to decry people's projects, but I think that's where doing the impact and value measurement comes in, because we can start to, in the first report, we start to say a little bit, we start to give you some stats, and we start to help you look at what your key value indicators are. Just by interviewing a range of people, we were able to really pull out where's the difference being made for what you're doing, and what's consistently changing and improving for people. And this time around, when we start to look at that this autumn and into the winter, we'll be able to build on some of that. And what happens is, over time, and you don't have to spend mega amounts of money. I mean, you don't get me wrong, it costs, but by doing it well at the start and then topping it up, it's been a couple of years now, hasn't it? Topping it up,
has, yeah.
You'll then get a bit of a longitudinal picture, and over time, you've got to start to build this consistency to show why you're credible, why you're worth supporting. And I know that you're just, putting in reaching communities, so we'll wish you well with that. And certainly impact measurement and value data is key as part of those sorts. So I guess, and I don't know, any other final reflections or things, from having been part of this? Was it surprising? Was it hard? Did you have to change the way you work or do things? How has it felt starting to
Well, I think, as you know, when we first started doing the first report, I had to change how I was collecting data, because you helped me set up an Excel spreadsheet to collect data. So obviously I've used that, and I was lucky enough to get a volunteer that helped me actually improve that, because Excel spreadsheets aren't my thing, although I've learned quite a bit, from the volunteer that we had. And I think that's important, because it's, and being a bit more thorough, with the, onboarding, make sure that you are collecting the right data and you're asking the right questions. And, and since, I've understood that, and I have, done a few reports, myself, looking at evaluating projects. But I still feel that I can, what I've done. I mean, and that's why I've asked you back, because I feel that it can be improved, by having somebody like yourself that's got that bit more knowledge and expertise to kind of really start pulling out what it is we are doing, backing it a bit more with evidence, where I feel that my report is a bit not lacking, but kind of really pulling that together.
And you make it, the bit that I'm sort of almost talking about is robustness. That's one of the things we'll no doubt have been chatting about.
Yeah, that I feel
having somebody independent come in and do something separate to you gives that extra level of legitimacy that people can't always do at the start. It might be that you just need training to start to do some of this stuff yourself. Then you can bring people in, with or without people writing people into funding bids, and then a year or two later having that wider sort of independent review just helps when you're approaching certain funders. So we'll cross our fingers for you, keep us posted, and either way we're looking forward to continuing to track your progress and improve your systems and see where we get come 2023. So thanks for sharing those thoughts with us. We'll see you soon.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.
So sorry if I couldn't be here in person to ask questions on, but I thought at least that gives you a feel for someone's mindset as to kind of why they got involved in this stuff. And I don't know that you've sort of gathered any sort of additional sort of insights there from her thinking, but certainly one of the reasons as well that she's looking at bringing us back in is because she's done a whole set of new programs. I know some people were saying it's different for this project or it's different for that, and while she started and she's got a kind of systems in place now for tracking things at the beginning, middle and end, and checking what's going on in terms of impact and what value might look like for different people in different ways. When these new projects have come online with young people who she wasn't working with before, or with veterans who she wasn't working with before, there'll be slightly different value and slightly different questions and slightly different things, and certainly new impact case studies to be writing. You know, there's writing a testimonial and then there's writing an impact case study, as we call it, and they're quite different. But they're not a million miles away, and if you just put a bit more depth into what you ask your testimonials, you get a lot more back in terms of analysing things in terms of value further down the line.
I think that's the interest. Sorry, I was just going to. I think the interesting thing is that, and this goes back to, and you said people don't understand counselling, social audit network process. Their process is called prove and improve. So it's really important to. There's never an end point with measuring social value. You know, it will always take you to a new thing, which is actually, when you embrace it, it's absolutely brilliant. You know, like the message that you've just read there, you know, you get things like that back through, and you will, so each year you do it, you just become more knowledgeable about how you do it. Each year you sort of, so I'm on, there's a client I've worked with called Netballs, they're based down in London, three fantastic women, and we're on our third year of measuring, and they've just become a lot better at asking the questions and digging, you know, trying to get that
finding the right
change.
opportunities as well. Initially you have to kind of do this as a sort of an extra thing, but as you get smarter at it, it becomes part of your program, it becomes part of your events, it becomes part of something you naturally do. And you know, some of you will be doing this anyway, but it becomes part of the flow of your year, or the flow of a program, or a part of an event, so that it's not an extra job.
Yeah.
Okay.
So say we've got the Excel spreadsheet with you know, the name and the ethnic background, the age, the demographic, and then say like we're having a discussion, we're having team cake, whatever, and then you ask the right questions, and you hear some really good things like, should we be recording it, or
there's
how
different
do we
ways,
capture
and it's a really good point,
to
and
get it into that spreadsheet?
yeah, so there's different methods, and we'll help people get their own plans later, but I think letting people know that you're doing this first and foremost is key, because otherwise it's all a bit sneaky.
I think it's
People might like offer.
Well, exactly. I think if you do it intentionally and on purpose and let people know this stuff, then there's different ways, and there's. So I just turned up to do a bit of an impromptu focus group with Shameen at Bollywood recently,
I saw that video.
and basically from a conversation, I didn't know how it was going to go. From a conversation, we went round the room, found out. So what did you value? What do you value about being part of Bollywood? And I'm busy scribbling down. In fact, I've got the notes upstairs. What everybody said. So I can spot who might I want to do an impact case study on, because there's a bit more to say, or there's a bit more of a journey travelled. And then everything that they were saying to me, I'd already put down a list of my best guess at what the impact and value might look like, and we're going to share with you. We're going to do an exercise this afternoon to show you this, and you'll have done it before, because if you've been on our programs, you get, you know, post-it noted and impact measured to death a little bit. But basically, after the back of what I was hearing, you never quite know when you do the first round of it what people are going to want to be open about, or what they want to say. But because these women knew Shameen very well, she briefed them on what they were coming to, they were all very open. And so within the space of 45 minutes, I've gathered all these impact case studies and started to jot down what they seemed to be consistently saying. And then I just sent this down around the room as a bit of a tally. So we then had a tally. It's all very fag packet, but you can turn it into pretty stats. You know, around the table, people either agreed or, you know, disagreed with the statements. And we had some stats pretty quickly. And the bit that surprised me was, because they'd been going to work for a year or more, we were quickly able to see, you know, pretty much 100% of the women that go to her programs suffer from depression and anxiety, and on some pretty strong medication, frankly, when they rock up there, and many of them haven't left the house for years. And within 12 months, well over 50 to 60% of them were, you know, off medication. Were, you know, normally you don't jump in with it, and so, you know, off medication questions. because it's just not appropriate, or but I think either through interviews or through certain discussions, I was surprised at just what we could get through, and 70% of them had lost weight, some of them 2 or 3 stone. So we tracked all this stuff, and that's going to stand her in such better stead when she's going to argue the task with different commissioners and different people to show over and above what she's achieving with particularly the South Asian community, but with all the women that she works with.
It'd be good to find out from her, because I saw those videos, and they were like videos of women. I think Tisha was one for them, and she said, this is what it has done for me. So I guess it would be like prepping the group beforehand about if you can say what impact it's made, this will help us to get more money and more funds so that we can keep going.
Exactly.
You have to be careful they don't get overly.
I was going to say to you, there's a process in accounting for social value, which goes from planning, which is to preparing, and then proving. So there is a process. I was just going to say, what we're going to show you today is a very sort of snapshot of how you can do it quickly. There is it's 3 days, the training course to become an accounting for social value practitioner, as we call it, so to be able to do it, and it goes into all of those things. So it looks at the questions, how you question, the environments in which you question. There's a lot of research methodology in it as well, in how you do that. So the actual 3 day goes through the history of social accounting, so you can sort of see what's behind it. It goes through the theory. So you can understand why we do these certain things. It goes through how the theory of change. It goes through how you ask questions in the right environment, and then the types of ways of engaging with stakeholders. It goes through stakeholder mapping. So there's quite a hefty sort of 3 day to be able to come through the side, and then there's mentoring after it as well.
That's a kind of program. We're going to give people a whistle stop on some of these elements later.
I was going to say, where do we find out about that 3 day?
We're actually, one of the things is at the moment myself and Nickala are working on a training program for social enterprise advisors.
So when you're running your own show, you don't necessarily want to go to the nth degree to do this stuff. You've got a particular interest in it, or if you think actually I could train up in this and gain an extra income stream from this long term, absolutely. But most people running what they want will just want to get stuck in, get some support, maybe buy people in to do the stuff, because not everybody's got the time and the patience for the Excel spreadsheet kind of know-how to do this stuff.
Spreadsheet.
There's other ways of doing it. I've got plenty of facts on
Is
paper.
there an app that would help you to organise that sort of thing? That's brilliant. I think so.
I'm trying to acknowledge how you do that. I think in terms of experience of how you capture data, how you get people to answer the right things. Nickala's absolutely brilliant at that, so she's going to take you through more of that this afternoon. Whereas my side is more sort of training practitioners, and I have been there, I've done it, but it's all the background behind it, and probably doing more complex stuff. But there's some really easy stuff that you can do that Nickala.
And I'll be glad to know what these apps are, because I'm not into apps for various reasons. I'm very keen to hear more about what this chap's doing, because we definitely need a good app. I haven't found one yet.
When you were doing the thing with the ladies that you were just describing, what process did you go through to get permission from them to share it? Did you have to get kind of written permission or verbal?
You can do, but no, they were just there in a focus group. At the time, they were happy to come to an informal focus group to share, what they valued about Come to Benefit and how they benefited as a result, and the rest that came out. It's all anonymous. Unless, and particularly with case studies as well, the case studies are often anonymous unless somebody's happy to be named or it's part of showcasing and championing somebody's progress, or poster girl or boy for the organisation type stuff.
In which case you can just get a consent form.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is in the process, there's basically a research information sheet. This is external stakeholders. Research information sheet and consent form.
Yeah.
So all the research is sort of aligned with a research methodology. So again, that's the robustness and making sure that it's aligned. So that's where, you know, doing a snapshot one, which Nickala's talking about, or sort of learning the process. So that quite sort of different things. So learning the process sort of takes you through sort of the you know what you need
More
to
in
do.
depth
More in
mechanics,
depth,
yeah.
yeah.
But through the support, and often our
Yeah.
social entrepreneurs, it would, I'm not mean this badly, it would be too much, it would be overwhelming, it would go over people's heads, but it's like, you know,
You don't
whereas,
need to know.
but you learn it, you know, we're all quite, you know, experiential learners in this world, give or take, and so Shameen now knows exactly how to do that. She'll be able to repeat it, a bit like Karen. She's got a system down which she's repeated herself, and she's only getting us back because there's some new bits and there's some extra bits, and she wants an independent view and voice on what she's finding.
So that's my viewpoint on this as well, is that you shouldn't be relying on a consultant. That's the way I see it. So the whole thing around this is you looking at your own methodology, being confident in doing that, and you being able to do that. Some organisations do, they want somebody external to come in and do it.
You need to know, don't you?
Yeah. But I really think the more that we can,
Well, you'll use the information and you'll evolve the information if you understand it yourself. If it's just this thing that's coming from over here, it's a bit like getting somebody else to write your business plan.
Yeah, that's how it was always purpose to
Yeah.
be. That, you know, it would be a process that people would adopt and then you just step in every now and again and say, oh, how do I do this? How do I do that?
So
I
I'm
was just
conscious.
going to share, just in
Sorry.
case it's useful, because I work in the charity sector, and when I started at the organisation, there were 15 of us, and when I left 8 years later, there were 100 people working there, so it grew massively during that time. And we went on a massive learning curve around this. And at first, when I got told you've got to do stats, you've got to do all this, I hated it. I didn't see myself as a numbers person. I could do basics. I don't know how to use a spreadsheet. And gradually I started to learn. I mean, I think what you're describing is a much more creative way of doing it. But now, actually, when you're talking about that 3-day training, I'm like, well, that sounds quite interesting. Before, I would have gone, I don't want to do that. So
it's the thing is, it's like what you get in your hands as a result. And so I've only got a C of maths in GCSE, you know, but I can do cash flow forecasts now until the cows come home, and I can do 3 to 5 year plans and, you know, business scenario, all sorts of things. And it's just, I do it because I really want people to know how on earth they're going to make money at what they do and see it clear as day. Brilliant. That's what will happen if we do this. That's what will happen if we do that. And so they've got something to get. So,
I can't do that yet. That's
no,
my
but what I
area.
mean, and the reason I'm mentioning is that is because it's the same for social value. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love talking to people and I love to hear what's happened as a result of these projects. And a lot of the people we have worked with and invested in anyway. So to see the impact, it gets me going and gets me upset, but it's just fantastic to see that ripple effect. So I think if you can see this is what you're going to get if you persevere with it, whether it's on a notepad, whether it's on Excel, whether it's a million post-its on a wall that somebody else types up, doesn't really matter. There's definitely a way for you to work it so that you've got what you need, and it both drives you, motivates you, and gets information out, and hopefully, ultimately, as Nicci said, gets the cash through the door, or gets those new partners on board, or helps amplify, you know, awareness of what you're all about and what you
Yeah,
know.
because if I go to one school and say, would you house my recycling vending machine? If I knew exactly how it had impacted the whole school and even the families beyond, I could then go to the next school and say, this is what they said.
It's really powerful.
You know,
And even from day
so-
one, we can perhaps predict, we can try and predict some of what that value could look like. So you can at least go in and say, we believe in year one, these sorts of outcomes will be possible for your school. Be our first partner and blah, blah, blah. So there's ways of predicting it.
Yeah, just to sort of tie off that. So I think we'll probably look at maybe doing these accounting for social value
because it'll tie
training
in the
new year and Sheffield stuff. So I think we'll probably put that out. So like I say, that's not just taking a snapshot. That's basically really going into what accounting for social value is. So you can go and officially do your own accounting for social value.
Is there like a little toolkit that?
Yes.
Yeah.
It comes with,
And
Yeah,
particularly if
all the
organisations are part of a group or have got a part of networks or have got particular projects or project leads, they could be training up others to do all that. But anyway, Shelley, we're pretty much over time, aren't we? So
We are, but I'd like to finish. So we're obviously going to look at the methodology this afternoon, and we'll have to think whether we can record it for, I know some people can't necessarily
we've got
stay.
webinars on all this stuff. So
Yeah, so but I'd just like to finish by asking Nickala and Nicci whether you've got any examples of social value where you've seen direct results.
and I'd
bring
like
it
to
to life.
invite our colleague into answer.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, Nadir.
Nadir works for the Growth Hub, but he's got a background in both social value advising, but having worked on the business side, where often our world looks at the kind of health and wellbeing service stuff, heart overhead sort of impact measurement and value measurement, whereas Nadir's come from the, I wouldn't say head over heart particularly, but from much more of a point of scale and large corporates and public sector organisations choosing to listen to this stuff. So it'd be great to hear examples of where social value work has led to direct results. I think you've heard enough from me on some of the examples I've given, but Nick, I don't know if you've got one you'd like to share, and we might ask for you.
I think that there's a few sort of angles on this, I suppose. I mean, Flourish, obviously, we started developing Flourishes, and it's made a huge difference. But I went out independently and did the interviews, and I was just so humbled by what came out of it, and it shaped Flourish. That's the only thing I can say about it.
Well, it helped us get organised. There would have been no time to grow programmes, and a lot of what we've done is a result of what we heard and what we would, when we were flailing around and not having structured contracts, let's say. That's definitely helped shape what we do, and helps amplify case studies of people that wouldn't have otherwise had their sort of stories out there.
Same with other organisations that I've worked with. I think they've succeeded in being able to communicate for crowdfunding, had a lot more success with funding bits. I'm talking sort of like from about a 40% chance to about an 80% chance. So it's really sort of expanded in that way. I think the most useful thing is that it's enabled them to shape the way they do things in the future.
And going for reaching communities bids, or bids that are, let's say 3 years core funding, or over 50 to 100k and upwards, you can't secure that kind of money without doing this sort of work.
Yeah, so all of so usually you can't forecast, you can't do a forecast, but that's one thing that we did develop into accounting for social value, so you can forecast the social value. And so we do that when we work with, well, certainly profit purpose, when we work with organisations to get them ready for a 3-year sort of core bid up to £500,000, I'll do a social return on investment forecast for them. And that's what usually makes a difference, because they're saying, okay, we can see what value you're going to offer. We know that you've got a measurement framework in place. We know what you're doing, which is a key thing to the funders. I suppose on the other side, on the bigger side, with commissioning, say one organisation we work with got a £65 million contract out of us doing a social value report. So contracting, hugely. Housing associations have worked with. Stockports is an interesting one. So I was asked to come in and do a social value report for the museums. in Stockport, they were going to shut them all down.
I know, I stood on the thing with the banner.
My report stopped that. Wow.
Yeah.
And that's why they put shops into the museums as well, because that's what recommended. But the social value report stopped them doing that. And there was also, we did one with Edgeley Play Centre. And so we stopped that from shutting the town.
Museum stuff, it's the happiest,
Well,
it's
that's
brilliant that as well.
Yeah, so we're going to shut them all down.
Yeah.
So we, I went in and did a big social value report and kept them open. And they're thriving.
Beat that, Lily.
And they've got amazing lottery funds.
Wow.
Of it.
Yeah.
So we've
We've
really made a
work.
difference in Stockport.
I guess from a different side of it here, I know you were telling us before a bit more, we're putting you on the spot. We do appreciate you coming down to our session today, but tell us a bit more from the business side, if you will, on, how that world will view this sort of stuff, because it's just good to get that additional perspective.
No, of course. So nowadays, more and more, as you've kind of rightly pointed out, local authorities and commissioning bodies in general are looking for maximising the pounds that they spend. So for every pound that they spend, they want to maximise that value that they get back from that. And that's not just price and quality of the actual scope of work that you're being asked to carry out, but what more you can provide to the residents of that procuring body. So the way that local authorities generally view it is that they look at kind of 4 key themes for each and every supplier that they give their contracts to. So first theme is jobs and skills. So how can we help promote local skills, local employment, really create a thriving community in that residing area? So that's looking at things like how can we, if we need to contract somebody to do a certain piece of work, whether it's supply chain works, or we need somebody to come in and do all of the retrofit of the electrical wiring, for example. Rather than bring somebody in that's established in a big business, can we bring a small local business into the supply chain and try and embed that? Then you've got things like employing people from disadvantaged groups, so people from people who haven't been in educational training for a year or are long-term unemployed, ex-veterans, people with disabilities, etc. So getting those marginalised communities back into work and supporting them through that employment is also something that suppliers can do to try and add that value to society. Apprenticeships, training. So how can you offer those types of things onto your contracts? So if you're delivering some work, is there space or capacity in that work delivery to do a work placement, getting somebody into a local college to help them understand the problems of real life work? Because not only are you impacting their life positively, but you're giving your business something new to offer to the community. So that's kind of touching on jobs and skills. The next one's about economic growth. So how can we help enable the local community to prosper? So can we get local supply chains involved? Can we get VCSC social enterprises involved in the delivery of that contract? How can we leverage those partners? How can we make links with those people? Because ultimately, you guys as social enterprises are the thriving, you're creating the thriving communities, and those big businesses need that touch into the local communities. So it's vital that they then partner with you to try and hit those communities and achieve those outcomes.
And it links into something that we often talk about, LM3, in terms of local multiplier effect as a tracking the local, where it stays local or in a particular area. And certainly one thing lots of voluntary community sector organisations do or can do is invest back in the sector or area in terms of what they're doing. So I know we track every year, and I know that 80% of our turnover goes back into social enterprises, voluntary community sector organisations, or women-led businesses, because that's what we're all about. So it can be something as simple as that can be quite distinct.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think the biggest one as well that people don't necessarily realise is social value is just buying locally. So if you're sourcing materials, why not sourcing locally? You're going to help improve our local area, and you're going to just kind of keep everyone in the area happy. So rather than outsourcing materials from abroad or from different areas in the UK, kind of trying to keep it in-house or keep it local. There's also really good player with local authorities especially. The next one is environment. So how we best impact the environment, and this doesn't necessarily mean recycling, but even things like reusing and circular economies. So if you've got any waste products or materials that you're not using, is there a way that you can, rather than disposing of that, give it to another business and let them use it for free? Because it's not of any value to you, you discard it anyway. So you're adding value for another organisation and by giving them that material, and you can claim that as your own social value. You donated £100 worth of aggregate to the local cement company, then that's another way to get there. And then you've got things like staff transport programs, using staff travel programs. So maybe like a minibus to go and pick up staff up from work, or some sort of
cycle to work.
Cycle to work, low emission vehicles, etc. So
Carbon footprint.
yeah, definitely that's a big one. But I think that's, for big businesses, that's a massive one, which is really assessing what is your benchmark, what's your baseline of CO2 emissions, and how can we strive to kind of bring that down as much as possible. Because what we look at is how many tons of carbon you're reducing year on year, and how your net zero plan, how you're aligning to that, and how you're progressing against that as well. Also really important. And then finally, societal investment. So how are we plugging resources directly into the community to help develop the community. So things like investing into local community centre or local gym, or there's local parks that need renovating or need support. Then how can we as an organisation can help with that? So whether it's time, volunteering time's simple one, litter picking and things like that, but other kind of wider initiatives. So can your organisation, for example, help create like a reservoir or like some sort of like a green space in some particular areas? There's some organisations that have that special, that kind of.
Some businesses have gone to those lengths, haven't they? Sort of redesigning and redeveloping their sort of estate or their plot of land at their factory or whatever else is going to increase biodiversity and all that jazz. But we'll hopefully, at least we'll certainly plan to chat to Nadir again shortly. It's great to just remind ourselves of that. And you know, this is what kind of gets me mildly frustrated, as well as, and I'm constantly banging on about it at different forums that I'm part of, is the voluntary community sector do a lot of this stuff as standard. The challenge we have is that we do it all at quite a smaller scale than the powers that be would like to see. And so if we can track and map and show exactly what it is we do en masse, in spite of with our little smallest beautiful approaches, but actually when you look at the thousands and thousands of VCSE organisations that are contributing to all this stuff, hopefully it will help
as social enterprise seriously, or social value organisations. We're sat on a gold mine. I talk about something called social IP, and that's your value, social value. That, as you've just heard, we can, if we can get these big businesses that are contracting to put social accounting into their social value into their supply chain,
make it easier for them to.
They'll engage with organisations like yourself. If you can tell them what that is, you've then got an opportunity to get a contract, because they want to put, and I know there's loads of agencies that have popped up for private businesses. They want to build social enterprise in their supply chains, because it means that they then hit that social value.
But we're often not delivering.
But we're not communicating it enough.
I think this is a common thing that we get private businesses saying to us that we want to help social enterprises, but they're not coming to us, and then we have some social enterprises who want to help it, we want to be.
But they're often not delivering the services that one another needs, and that's there's a little bit of work to be done on that. Go on, Jen, last question, and then we're going to wrap up for a lunch break.
The woman that did the culture change discussion day on Thursday.
Culture Bridge?
Culture, I think she's called Cats, Share Impact.
Oh yeah.
So she's spent the
Culture Camp.
Culture Camp.
Oh no, that was there's Cat Lecoq, or there's Kerry Tottingham.
Kerry.
Yeah.
Kerry. So she spent the summer interviewing social entrepreneurs about changing work culture. And then her next project is linking up corporates that have the corporate social responsibility to do with social enterprises. And I think it's quite ambitious.
That's
because
our
they're
Kerry.
going back to like, you know, the tick boxing, and are they really genuine about making a difference and linking up with social enterprises like us? So be interested to see how
I don't see something called social impact bonds. So we have those developed and in place, which is a bond between the companies, the different agencies. So it's all done in like a pledge of social impact bond. So they buy your social value. And
They're complicated, and there's not so many in the country yet. But
we've
anyway,
done some good ones.
yeah. And on that little bombshell, I'm going to thank everybody for their sort of time. Hand back to Shelley, who we've just kind of hijacked, really. But I think we've answered your question.
I think you have. You're very well behaved. Thank you very much. Oh, yeah. So, just like to take the opportunity.
Sometimes you need to pull us back, don't you?
I couldn't possibly. It's all really good stuff. So thank you. So yeah, just like to take the opportunity to thank our panel and all the questions as well, which are really interesting and useful. We obviously can carry on chatting over lunch. I'm sure we've got loads more to talk about, and then we'll look in more detail this afternoon. So thank you to everyone who's joined us at home. I'm just going to stop recording.